There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I'm your host, Richard Schaff. The program sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-American, pro-Christian, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here only by the grace of God. Joe Biden wants to become our president, and he's promised to transform America. Let's look at what might very well happen if we elect Joe Biden as our next president. He's promised just recently that if he's elected, his administration won't just rebuild the nation, he'll transform it. Well, critics are questioning what he is planning to change. But you can bet he'll change it, folks. From the left, critics say the former vice president and senator has spent more than 40 years in the federal government and hasn't solved any major issues. And the right critics fear that a Biden White House will take its direction from the far left side of the party. Representative Beto taking our guns. AOC put her in charge of energy with her maddening green ideas. Fox News reported that the Biden campaign sent a link to its website when asked for comment about the tweet. On one section of Biden's site, which outlines Biden's vision for the office, several of his policy points and plans are listed. For example, Biden says he plans to combat the virus by offering, quote, wide availability of free testing, end quote. Another quote, a decisive economic response that starts with emergency paid leave, end quote. This would help people, supposedly, that are affected by the virus. Biden continues to lead in the polls. Republican strategist Karl Rove said that the president must, quote, reset his campaign. When you're in a barrel, Rove notes, when you're getting a lot of bad press and the polls are going against you, you need to do something that says, we're going to go in a different direction. That's what I mean by a reset. A quote from Karl Rove. Biden, however, is now also facing issues on which positions need more explanation. First, he said he was going to reject any proposals being made by Black Lives Matter, such as defunding the nation's police departments. Later, they talked him out of that. He capitulated to the left, said he would defund our police departments. He promised vast sums for tax increases to assure for medical for all. Yep, all free medical, even if you're an illegal. Wow. What would Biden do with our borders? Open them. Let them all in. Reduce more controls. Reduce the members on ICE and Homeland Security. Think about it, folks. Look at what's happening now in our major cities. Democrat-controlled. Tucker Carlson asked a question on his program, could Democrats lead a country that they despise? You know, he noted, these people actually hate America. Loving the people you lead us is the most basic prerequisite of leadership, noted Carlson. Tucker Carlson called into question the patriotism of Democrats and the mainstream following a weekend of criticism over Trump's 4th of July celebration. Tucker Carlson said, and I quote, it's been considered out of bounds to question a person's patriotism. It's a very strong charge. We try not to make it, but in face of all of this, the conclusion can't be avoided. A quote from Tucker during his opening monologue on Tucker Carlson Tonight. He noted these people, referring to the Dems, actually hate America. There's no longer a question about it. And yet at the same time, they desperately want to control America more than anything. And that leads to the most basic of all questions. Can you really lead a country that you hate? Carlson pointed to withering criticism from liberals who took issue with Trump's July 4th Mount Rushmore talk. This when a CNN reporter had described as a monument of two slave owners situated on stolen land. His description, the CNN reporter. Ask yourself, Carlson noted, what kind of parent would you be if you hated your children? What kind of officer would you make if you didn't care about your troops? It'd be awful, Carlson noted. The results would be ugly. It wouldn't work. Loving the people you lead and caring deeply about them is the most basic prerequisite of leadership. The host went on, quote, the leaders of today's Democrat Party do not. They despise this country. They've said so. They continue to. That is shocking, but it's also disqualifying. We cannot let them run this nation because they hate it. A quote from Tucker Carlson. He warned, imagine what they would do to it. I ask you to take a look, good listeners. What do you think they would do to it? Now let's take a look at some areas that the Dems control right now. No, fortunately, they don't have the Senate and they don't have the presidency. They've got the House, and sometimes they've got the Supreme Court, and they've got the mayorships of a lot of our large cities, a lot of our states. Let's just take a look at a few of them and see if this is a type of leadership we'd like on a national basis. It'll give you some kind of an idea of how things could go if they do get control of the U.S. Senate and the White House. For one thing, shootings in New York City, well, they went up 205% in the first 3 weeks after they started defunding their police department. They did it by disbanding of their plainclothes unit. And that 205% increase is year to year from a year ago. That's right. After making the decision to disband its plainclothes anti-crime unit, New York City has seen a 205% increase in shootings. That's in comparison to the same period a year ago. And the same mayor, Mayor de Blasio, year to date. According to the New York Post, 116 shootings took place in the city since the officers were reassigned on June 15th to July 2nd of this year. That's a 205% increase from the same period in 2019 when there were 38 shootings. New York City saw 205 shootings last month, making it the city's bloodiest June in 24 years. I feel like we're giving back the streets to the criminals, said the mother of one shooting victim, one whose son was shot just days after the unit was disbanded. Whatever the problem they have, let's address it. They don't disband the unit. Yes, many lives would have been saved if they hadn't. It wouldn't have just been my son. Many others could have been saved, according to this mother. The use of plainclothes officers has come into question in recent weeks after the death of George Floyd, a black man who died in Minneapolis police custody in late May. The nation has been looking for answers on possible police reform measures. I think it's time to move forward and change how we police the city. A quote from New York City Police Commissioner Dumit Shea. Yes, he did it, and they defunded. The anti-crime unit out of New York City's came out of New York City Street's crime unit. This was funded in 1971 and disbanded in 2002 after the fatal shooting of Armando Diablo. A federal investigation also found the street crimes unit was profiling non-white people. They changed it. They thought they had the reason. And what happened? First 3 weeks, crime, shootings, up 205%. More on New York City. The mayor says, this is Mayor de Blasio, in case you didn't know, he is a demo. He said the New York Police Department funds are going to, the money they were giving to them, well, now they're going to finance the broadband internet in public housing. Isn't that nice? Yeah. He weighed in on his plan to redistribute finances from the NYPD to other agencies, saying the money would be used to expand broadband internet agencies in public housing. Quote, this takes us back to the issue of broadband. This gets us right back to the issue of it. The digital divide is very, very intense. 1.5 million New Yorkers lack broadband access. It's another tale of two cities. A quote from their good mayor, Mayor de Blasio. And of course, where do the money comes? From the police department. Yep. Well, this is an issue that's been taken up by our new internal task force, our Racial Inclusion and Equity Department, he added. Who's he? De Blasio. We're on the city level going to take resources that came out of the NYPD's capital budget and put it into broadband access for residents of public housing. Wow. I wonder why they don't increase food stamps in New York City, too, and take it from the police funding fund. Good exchange, don't you think? Oh, and by the way, did you see this? Where de Blasio is going to ban all large gatherings in New York City except Black Lives Matter protests. That's right. Another quote, another change in policy. Good policies, isn't it? Democrat, Mayor de Blasio, New York City, said it on CNN that he was banning all large gatherings in the city over COVID-19, except for Black Lives Matter protests. His quote, folks, he claims that Black Lives Matter protests are important because it's about calling for historic change. So he's not going to stop them, no matter whether people get sick or not. Buck Sexton wrote, and I'm going to quote, so these outdoor events that bring together the community and let people enjoy their lives are banned. But de Blasio thinks thousands of shrieking protesters screaming in each other's faces for hours is awesome, and we need more of it. Seems fair, end quote. And by the way, the ban goes through September 30th, according to ABC News. And what happens in the meantime? They're defunding the police. You got less policemen, less police protection. Trump noted on New York, he said it's unrecognizable. He's enraged over the crime and over the leadership. President Donald Trump soured on the city he long ago called home, and its leadership by the Democrats. He recently ripped into a number of scores, not the least of which he said was anger over Black Lives Matter sign painted outside Trump Towers on Fifth Avenue between 56th and 57th Street. A quote from our president, New York is not recognizable. He said it on Fox News' Sean Hannity. Among Trump's points, he faulted Mayor de Blasio for accepting the U.S. government's help during the virus pandemic, only to throw a big Black Lives Matter sign right down the middle of Fifth Avenue. The city's a city that's enraged. A quote from Trump, again, noting on Hannity. New York is not the place that it was. Everyone is leaving, he noted. They're leaving for Florida and other places. It's very sad, actually, to see what's happening. Trump also said Democrat leaders in New York City, Chicago, and Atlanta are playing politics and refusing help despite surges in violent crime. Crime is way up. Shootings are way up. Murders way up. He noted it's unbelievable. And it's not just New York, he added. Chicago. What's going on in Chicago? Well, he noted we're looking at it very seriously because we're going to have to do something. We've recently supposed to be asked to come in and help, the federal government to help. We've got the greatest people in the world and we can solve it. But Illinois, well, he noted, they have to ask. Yet look every weekend and every week in Chicago. Its numbers are not believable. Atlanta's starting to have some problems. I know it, folks. Another Dem mayor. Atlanta. Yep. Trump noted they're ready to help and act in both cities. At some point, we may have to act anyway, he noted. He said we're going to have to do it sooner or later if things don't change. What would it be like if Biden was in the White House? You know, that's where we started on today's program. What would it be like if we had that change? Just stop and think about it for a moment. And then let's look out in Seattle, where they broke up the CHOP zone a week or so ago. Trump said the city acted after the federal government gave them notice that they were ready to go in and take the area back. It had been taken over, by the protesters as an act of defiance amid the Floyd protests when the police were kept out, a situation that escalated to fatal shootings. We were going in very soon, our president noted, and we'd have taken the CHOP back. We'd have taken it back very easily. Frankly, he noted, the people gave up. They got tired. Circling back to the virus, which has also been a major test for his administration, Trump also lamented the fact that he provided so much help in New York amid the virus pandemic, despite the political attacks from de Blasio and Governor Andrew Cuomo. I was very nice to Mayor de Blasio, Trump noted. I'm quoting him here. I sent him ventilators when he needed them. I got them a hospital help when they needed it. I sent him a hospital ship when they needed it. I got them everything he needed. I got them the gowns, the mask. I got him everything, the shields, everything, he noted. How would it have been if Joe Biden had been there? Keep it in mind as we're going through what's happening in our major cities under Democrat control. Right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, our governor, Democrat, told the Republican Party and Trump, that he couldn't guarantee that they could have the convention as they wanted it in Charlotte. So they had to be canceled. What did it cost the merchants? I've told over $200 million out of Charlotte alone, where the restaurants and the hotels, they need the help. He just recently let them go back into business, And could you believe this? I just saw a poll where Cooper's leading when he's up for a re-election this November. God help us. Back to Seattle, the left-wing CHOP zone is responsible for a 525% spike in Seattle crime. This is what their governor called the area a summer of love. Well, after characterizing the infamous CHOP area of downtown Seattle as a summer of love, Mayor Jenny Darkin was eventually forced to acknowledge that the failed communist experiment was responsible for a whopping 525% spike in crime. As we highlighted, following weeks of violence and chaos, CHOP was finally dismantled by Chicago police. Hear that? Chicago police. But only after the occupiers marched on Mayor Durkin's 5,000 square foot, $7.6 million house. For almost the entirety of June, the area was plagued with fights, bickering, robberies, rapes, with occupiers targeting both outsiders and each other. It's now emerged that compared to the same period last year, from June 2nd to June 30th, there was a 525% jump in crime in the CHOP area of Seattle. Democrat mayor. This figure is even better than the 3,000% number that was repeatedly cited by the Seattle police chief. Rather embarrassing after proclaiming a summer of love and telling President Trump, quote, "Seattle's fine. Don't be afraid of democracy," she noted. That's her quote. Yeah, Seattle's fine. Don't be afraid of democracy. Well, she was forced to acknowledge the numbers in her own emergency order. The number states that there were 22 accidental incidents, in-person-related crime in the area. This included 2 additional homicides, 6 additional robberies, 13 additional aggravated assaults, 2 including additional non-fatal shootings. So, in other words, this commune that they built it in the name of opposing violence and brutality. It led directly to a massive increase in violence and brutality. So much for totalitarian left. And that's just one city out of many. Just think, though, if we could have had Joe Biden in the White House and Democrats controlling the Senate all this time, we wouldn't have had any threats of intervention at all. Is that what we really want, folks? Is it really? And if you think all the liberals, they just want a few things and they're going to stop, don't ever believe it. They'll always want more. Out in Seattle, listen to this. I'm going to give you a report. CHOP USA, Seattle council member says she's, quote, coming to overthrow racist, sexist system of capitalism. Her words, a direct quote from Seattle's Socialist City Councilwoman Kshama Sawant. She has threatened to overthrow the entire capitalistic system. She said this during a recent meeting of local politicians, directly threatening Amazon, that's their home base, and other major corporations. A quote from the good councilwoman: "Working people will go out in the thousands. We will not stop there. We are fighting for more. We are preparing the ground for a different kind of society. We're coming for you and your rotten system. We're coming to dismantle this violent, utterly bankrupt system of capitalism." Again, a direct quote from Councilwoman Kashana Sawin, Seattle. She continues, "We cannot and will not stop until we overthrow it and replace it with a world based on solidarity and equality, a socialist world." Her quotes, the good councilwoman. You think they'll ever be satisfied? And wouldn't it be great if you had Joe Biden sitting in the White House and Schumer heading up the Senate? And what's happening out in liberal-controlled Minnesota? Well, the Minneapolis Council got members some private security guards. Of course, this is after they defunded the Minneapolis police. The city of Minneapolis is paying $4,500 a day for private security for 3 council members who have received threats following the police killing of George Floyd. After the police funding now, this is what's happened. 3 council members have the security detail. They have been outspoken proponents of defunding the Minneapolis Police Department, and they did it. And now they got private security, and it's costing the taxpayers $4,500 a day. One council member that voted to defund the police noted that he wasn't going to discuss the security measures. He said, "I don't feel comfortable publicly discussing the death threats against me or the level of security I currently have protecting me from those threats." Well, folks, I don't know too much about what the security is, but I can tell you how much it's costing and just did. Minneapolis mayors have been traditionally had a security detail provided by a Minneapolis police officer who also functions as the mayor's driver. The 13 council members are not given the same protection. Asked why Minneapolis police are not providing security measures to the 3 council members, a city spokesman said the police department resources are needed in the community. Of course, this is after defunding, folks. And the hourly cost of private security is similar to the cost for a police officer, the spokesman added. Yep. After the police are defunded, they go to private sources and spend $4,500. Wow. Jenkins said she had not reported the threats to the Minneapolis police because they were too preoccupied taking care of other details. That in Minneapolis. Well, I got another report, same subject, on the private security in Minneapolis. Sometimes it's different. It's good to look at it. Well, I thought it'd be a different view, maybe too much, but it sounds kind of repetitious. In fact, Minneapolis has spent $63,000 in the first 3 weeks for private security. Yeah, another report, $63,000 on this one, for city council members after they called to defund the city's police department. You know, they got to take care of these council people, the ones that say they don't need police. But isn't it nice that funding's available for private security for them, for the mayor, for the governor? But the poor people out in the streets that need the police protection, it's not there. There's no police. They've been defunded. The city council votes to abolish the police department and then hires taxpayer-funded private security to protect them. This, a report from a Minnesota Republican on Fox News. What about the families and children of the city of Minneapolis that need that protection, he asks. I think that Minneapolis, the business owners and the citizens, have some grave concern of what's happening in the beautiful city of Minneapolis. Fox News affiliate Fox 9 locally reported on private security hired recently, noting that the threats were made against 3 council members who vocally called to defund the police department. The city council unanimously approved to establish a holistic method for public safety in a move called for after the death of George Floyd. That holistic method, that's their quote, not mine. Representative Stauber, a former police officer, said he believes that communities should invest in their police department. Best practices, transparency, accountability, and performance matters, he noted. That's how community policing does it. You build trust between law enforcement and their community, and it starts with leadership at the top. I note, Minneapolis, Democrat, communistic mayor, communistic Democrat governor, and boy, wouldn't it be great if they could top it off for all of us with Joe Biden for president. Anyway, back to Minneapolis, this present representative noted that as a police officer, he'd been shot twice, once off duty in 95 and in another incident, the second one where he was literally fighting for his life. He also commented on the rioting and looting that's taken place since the George Floyd killing. I think we're a nation of law and order, he said. Our republic is established by laws. The lawlessness that is happening, the rioting, the disrespect for one another has to stop. Mob rule doesn't take over this country. It can't, he noted. And those are just a few examples. I don't have time to go into it with all of them in this report. But where do you think we're at now after all of this rioting, with the Dems leading most of our major cities, in states that they control many of? After a month of all this, the leftist rioting, looting, all this arson, Trump's approval among black voters still remains at 28%. After a month of rioting, arson, looting in cities across America, U.S. President Trump's approval in the black community continues to grow. Approval for Trump from black voters remains at 28%. His approval rating has an average of over 20%, actually 22.8% since last May. Well, folks, according to this report, that's devastating news for the Democratic Party. You see, it's impossible for Democrats to win a national election if they lose 20% of the black vote. Boy, I hope that's a good prediction. Incidentally, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, he notes that the far left wants to change the face of our country, but he's assured us we will fight back. Senator Lindsey Graham ripped far-left demonstrators tearing down statues across the U.S. He said they want to make permanent change in the face of our country, and we're going to fight back. A quote from Graham, "There's nothing these people won't do to change the face of our country, and we're tired of it. We will fight back." Well, let me make a note right here. That's a good quote from Senator Graham. I hope he can follow through on it. But I guarantee you one thing. If we end up with the U.S. Senate under control of the Dems and Charles Schumer, and if Joe Biden replaces Donald Trump, we'll have a heck of an uphill battle to preserve our republic. And I think most of you, my listeners, will agree with this. And in closing, I want to take you one step further about what the rioters really want. Think about this. I bet you haven't heard this. Don't have time to go into the whole report, but I want to give you just a base of it. Why the rioters will eventually turn their rage on Christianity if we don't stop them. The outrage over statues and the white depictions of Christ is meant to distract us from the real end game, the cancellation of Christianity itself. This report comes to me from Nathan Stone, came out the end of June. Toward the end of his reign, Thutmose III of Egypt ordered the destruction of all the public monuments that his aunt, the former leader of Egypt, of all of the destruction of everything of his aunt. It wasn't the first instance of what they call iconoclasm that the world had seen, but it became one of the most memorable. Iconoclasm is the deliberate destruction of images, and it existed almost as long as man's walked on the earth. When it took place, there was usually deep and profound reasons for these planned destructions. Rulers sought to erase the memory of their rivals. Leaders like Leo III of the Byzantine Empire, he believed chopping statues was a good way to get God on their side in the next battlefield. Sometimes images were destroyed simply because it was believed some icons needed to be smashed, since they represented an evil to be defeated. Such was the motivation of the Pentecostal sects who destroyed the Catholic statues in the Netherlands, and Muslim populations who destroyed Christian icons in the Middle East and Africa. Recently, Shaun King, who's a champion of the Black Lives Matter movement, called for the destruction of Christian iconography statues and the stained glass if they represent Christ and Christ's mother, Mary, or any of the apostles as white. This, according to King, makes the iconograph nothing more than a, quote, gross form of white supremacy, end quote, and, quote again, racist propaganda, end quote, created to be tools of oppression. To King, the only proper measure to any fossil of racism or oppression is to destroy it. Any depictions of Christ or the Virgin Mary with light skin represent what he calls, quote, white supremacy. And according to King, it's all got to go. Now just think on it for a moment. Just a year ago, believing that the radical left had a goal that would have sounded like that would have been a conspiracy theory. But within the last 4 weeks, St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City was vandalized. Across the White House, St. John's Church was attacked twice. Neither church nor the statue was involved in any way or form with the deaths of George Floyd or Rayshard Brooks. More recently, in the Polish city of Breda, a memorial to World War II Polish soldiers was vandalized by the Black Lives Movement graffiti. Never mind that the memorial features a replica of the Virgin Mary as a black woman. The soldiers, the memorial heroes, were fighting fascists, and Poland has no history of colonization anywhere. The reason for the attacks became clear when considering the Black Lives Matter and Antifa are Marxist organizations, and Marxism is an enemy of Christianity. It's why the Soviet Union was an atheistic state. They wanted to replace God with the Communist Party. And other reasons comes from the hatred Marxism holds for Western civilization. The dream of Marxism is to eradicate Western civilization and replace it with itself. Marxism assumes that because the windows are dirty and cracked, the entire house must be demolished. We see the same hatred today in the insurrections occurring right now. There's no reason for mobs pulling down statues of Ulysses Grant, Hans Christian Haig, or calling for statues of Abraham Lincoln as the great emancipator to be removed. But if Western civilization is evil, this means all the elements that went into it creating Western civilization must also be destroyed. And that, good listeners, includes Christianity. Think about it today and remember this. If this trajectory isn't stopped, we should not be surprised if the Marxists among us take King seriously and begin to burn our churches like they're burned in Europe. This is a path we are on. Visualize this, if you will, what we've covered. It's our election coming up in November, and this is a time that we have to make a decision. Do we want to keep the defender of our faith, Donald Trump, in? Or is it time to put the Dems in, with Joe Biden as their token leader? Think about it. And if it doesn't put you on your knees, I'll be shocked. Incidentally, this program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. I am their CEO, Richard Schaff. I bring you these comments from time to time, and I will work with you personally if you have an interest in a log home. Call me toll-free, 800-848-3310. God bless. Until next week.